The garden looks pretty different now. I have done a lot of cleanup. I've pulled out some of the things that were dying off and starting to put in things for fall. All of this is 3 tomatillo plants. I thought they'd grow like peppers. I didn't realize they would spread out so much. This is good for me to learn though, because next year I want to plant ground cherries and they're very similar to these, so I'll know to give them quite a bit of space depending on how many plants I have. The cucumbers and the cantaloupe that were all in here are producing. There's quite a few green cantaloupes in there, but the cucumbers are dying back. You can see how pitiful those vines look. I do have one cucumber that I'm leaving for seed as an experiment for seed saving, and as soon as that is ready to go, I'm going to pull that vine out and then see how long it takes to get these cantaloupe ripe. These are the Hale's Best, and I haven't had a ripe one yet, although there are at least 8 or 9 in there, and I hope that they're at different stages so that they don't all come in at the same time, because we can only eat so much cantaloupe. I want to show you my asters that finally bloomed. They are so pretty. I think next year we're going to move this pot to the front porch to have a splash of color there. The patio and the front porch area actually get about the same amount of sun. It's just at different times of day. The patio gets morning sun, and then in the afternoon it's kind of shaded, and the front porch is the opposite. So I will see how they do, but I may well plant some more back here too, just because they're so pretty. I have several seeds left, and when I deadhead these, I am going to try and save some seeds from this bunch too. And my good garden helper is on the job this morning. I'm so glad she's here. Some of the melons in the melon patch are looking pretty rough. Some of the vines are still green and growing. In fact, they have spread out over the yard, as you can see. In between the melon patch and the pumpkin patch, it's kind of gotten so gnarly that it's been impossible to mow without chopping up all the vines. So I'm going to have to get in here and clean this up so we can mow between there. I've had quite a few Tigger melons and an Amish melon and a Charente melon, which were pretty tasty. So far, I think we like the Amish melon the best. I was surprised that the Tigger melons were not sweeter, and I don't know if that's how they're supposed to be, but they fell off the vine, so I'm assuming they were ripe. Still kind of iffy on those. The vine peach has been extremely prolific. I have harvested quite a few of those, and I'm sad to say that I'm not that crazy about those either. I liked the idea of them, but they really don't taste like peaches, and they really don't taste like mangoes either. They're also called mango melons. So I'm not sure exactly what to do with them. I did try to make some preserves with some jelly making pectin, and I tried to do it without sugar because we don't do sugar, but it didn't come out very good. I think I can add sweetener to it after, like before we eat it, but I won't do that again. This is the last plant in the pumpkin patch. I left it because it looks healthy. I didn't see a lot of bug damage and very little powdery mildew, and I'm not sure whether it'll make another pumpkin, but I'm going to leave it to find out for a little while. I have taken out everything else, and you can see how the melon vines have just crawled over and sprawled over, and I don't know if I will plant anything here for the fall or not. I had considered doing like some cabbage or something I could throw a row cover over, but I'm still thinking about that because I have some other things I need to do first. My comfrey is finally coming up. I was getting pretty nervous about it because I planted it about a month ago and I just had some root cuttings and I was really starting to think that I'd gotten a dud batch, but it's coming up. I plan to cut some of this to make comfrey salve, and I also know that it has several uses, so I'm going to do some more research and learn more about comfrey. One of the things we've talked about doing, if you hear machinery in the background, it's my neighbor mowing his pasture. Sorry about that. We are literally at the city limit, and like if I hop over that fence, I'm no longer in the city. So we have farms around us, which is great, except for when he's mowing and it's noisy and you're trying to make a video, but that's okay. We'll work around it. Anyway, one of the things that we've been talking about is moving these pots. Now I know I just set them up and I like the arrangement, but the person who mows the yard is encountering some obstacles that don't really need to be there, so I'm going to move them again. Now what I'm planning on doing is running more of my weed barrier. I do have some left and I did order new pins, so I have more of those. And I'm going to put it down next to this side of the pumpkin melon patch. I'm hoping also to put some between the melon and the pumpkin patch and expand that area, but that may have to wait because I only have so much right now. But I'm going to put down what I have and hope that it's long enough at least to make a row for one set of these to go over that way, and then they'll be on the weed barrier so that mowing this area won't have all these obstacles. And then next spring I will work on getting my herb garden going here. I do have the oregano and the peppermint and the basil and the tansy and the comfrey. So I'll have a few that won't have, that don't have herbs right now, like the cucumber, which isn't really doing anything, although the bees like it. The hollyhocks have died off. That pot on the end that had the status in it is just, they all died. I guess they couldn't take the heat in the change of environment where they were in the shade and then they were in the sun, and I think the sun just burnt them up. But I have a pepper plant over there that's not doing anything. I have a pepper plant right here that's not doing anything. So I'm going to plan which herbs will go in here next year. I do have quite a few new ones to plant, and I will see what I think will work best in a pot. The basil seems to be doing really well in a pot, so I may try other types of basil. What are you doing? We're trying to make a video. So right down through here is where I'm going to put the weed barrier, and then I will shift these over, see how many I can get in there, and see how much more space I need to do. Now if we weren't walking through here to get to the shed, I could just cover this whole thing and then give the vines even more space to run. But that's something that I'm still thinking about. I mean, if it were up to me, I would probably plant everything and just let it run. But I'm limited on space, so I'm going to have to start thinking either fewer viney plants, and I love viney plants, or I'm going to have to up my trellising game. And that project is actually in the planning stages. I have left these tomato plants. There are some beefsteaks in there, which I'm still waiting on to get ripe. It seems like those green ones have been there forever. Getting nice and big, but I would like to see them get nice and red so we can eat them. The cherry tomatoes are still loaded, still blooming. Actually, I think these are grape tomatoes. And you can see where the grass on the edges has kind of grown up too tall. That's one reason why I'm thinking about just extending the weed barrier all the way across, because no matter where the edge of that stuff is, the grass is going to grow up. And if I had it all the way across the back, it might keep things under control except for the front edge of the garden, which I can either mow or get with the weed eater. And my volunteer avocado tree came up in the chive pot. I guess I should have mixed the compost a little more finely, gotten the lumps out, but there it is, and it's okay with me. I've taken out a lot of these tomato plants. The rosellas are still here, the Juliets are still here, and I did leave that one cosmic eclipse on the very end, just in the hope that I will eventually get one to taste. But I did take out the white beauties, these yellow pears, the pink bumblebees, the money makers. All of those were just dying and they weren't making anything new. So out they go. I made these kind of raised rows here instead. I planted beets and radishes and spinach and turnips, and I'm hoping that they'll make a good crop for fall. What are you doing? I also took out my beloved round zucchini and the squash that I had set aside to save for seed wasn't quite big enough. It wasn't quite mature enough. So I didn't get to save seeds out of that. But I do have a few from this year that I will plant next year, and I will try again. Now in here, I reworked the soil and I put in some golden beets. So thanks to Anna over at the Fermented Homestead, I decided I just had to have golden beets, and there they are. They are sprouting. They're still kind of hard to see because they're tiny, but they are sprouting. And speaking of sprouting, my yard-long beans that I planted a second crop of have come up and they're growing well. I did plant a few more on the other side of this trellis because those radishes will be out of there and out of the way pretty soon. And they might even appreciate some of the shade in these last hot days of summer that the bean plants will give them. My big beautiful bean vines are gone. I'm okay with that though, because I noticed that they had started to die back and I had a serious aphid invasion. The ants were forming the aphids and they were pretty much all over these plants. Now the ladybugs did show up, but they were a little late and I think they were overwhelmed because they just could not keep them under control no matter how much they ate. So I pulled out the old vines and you can see what I planted again has already started to come up. So I'm hoping that I will have a second crop of yard-long beans. Next year I plan to plant, I think, pretty much this whole strip of the garden with beans so that I'll have enough to can. This trellis in the front where the cucumbers were and where I've planted beans now will probably get moved somewhere else so that I can either put the cucumbers on it again or something else that vines, maybe the cucamelons. But I have just ordered some trellising material from Haas Tools, and I got 100 feet and I have T-posts, so I think I will be putting up a trellis down this whole entire row and letting the beans just go as they will. I also got some red noodle beans because why not have more beans? And I think I'll either plant them on each side, like plant the red beans on one side and the green beans on the other side, or I'll alternate them up and down both sides of the trellis. Either way, I should have a nice crop of beans. And then all the seeds that I saved from the yard-long beans should grow well, because all of these that I've replanted down here are the ones that I saved from the beans that I grew, which is pretty exciting. Right now, though, I have some radishes in this row that I planted a couple of weeks ago, and they're looking good. There are the Daikon radishes, which I'm hoping will help the soil stay loose, as well as, you know, just having something interesting. They're getting pretty good size. I know they take a while, but that's fine. I'm not in a hurry for those. I think I planted pak choy there. I didn't have my map with me when I planted, which is a bad move, but I know there's pak choy in here somewhere. And there are the kohlrabi, which I said I'd never try again, but of course I'm going to try them again, because I just want to be able to grow kohlrabi. The okra is looking good. It has been blooming and producing, and I have a little experiment going on over here, which I will explain at a later point when I talk about the seeds that I'm saving. But I've been fairly happy with it. It's still not terribly tall, but I have already left some pods to save the seeds out of, and I think next year I might like to plant it in a long row down the side instead of having it in a patch like this, because it's kind of hard to get into those ones in the middle. Because, you know, even though it's spineless okra, it's still kind of itchy when you get in there. Look at the size of this pepper. It still has a way to go before it gets ripe, too. Here's one. And there's another one. Actually, one of those pepper plants got so laden down with peppers that it fell over and broke and died. I harvested the green peppers. But wow, that was a surprise. I didn't expect them to get that big. The Moon and Stars watermelon is growing well, and it's finally setting some melons. The Chocolate Beauty peppers are producing well, although I have yet to get a ripe pepper. And of course, I will leave that up to the pepper taster to say whether they are good enough to grow again next year or not. In the front there is the San Marconi, which is also a good-sized pepper. I think it's very similar to the Atris, and so I won't grow both of those next year, just one. And behind that is the Cayenne. Now, even though one of us is a pepper fan, he is not a fan of the super hot ones, so the Cayenne will be used sparingly. Probably I will dry that and then stick it in a jar and maybe use it to season some chili or something like that, very sparingly, because we don't like super hot food. That is a combination of a Tennessee dancing gourd and a Kajari melon, which were planted pretty late. My fall crop of peas have sprouted. They are coming along pretty well. I actually messed up, and these were seeds that I saved for next year rather than seeds I had left over from this spring. But that also shows me that my seed saving techniques for the pea seeds worked very well. So when these start producing peas, I can leave a few more for seeds, and I should have plenty for next spring. And here is the finished project. I put all of these tubs in a line on top of the ground cover, and that should keep the weeds down from between them and make it a little easier to mow through here. I also like those bare circles. I thought that would be a great place to put some fruit trees, but I don't have any fruit trees except for the plum tree right now, and I'm not going to move it. but it's a thought. So if I ever need to clear a space for trees, maybe I can just set one of those tubs on the spot for a while and let it kill off everything, and then I'll have a nice bare spot to plant something. If it were earlier in the season, I would probably try and plant something there now, but I'm not going to do that. I also finally got around to getting over here and taking out that pitiful corn that was up there. I was disappointed, but I really didn't have enough plants to make a good crop. And I've learned my lesson. Corn needs a lot of space and it needs a lot of time, and I just don't want to fool with it anymore, honestly. I also got most of the grass and weeds out of this area up here. This has been a problem area for pretty much ever since I've been trying to build the garden back here. And I have to remind myself that not even 2 years ago this was all part of the yard, and so I'm going to be fighting grass for a while. But I did get it out, and I had one little section of weed barrier left over after I got done with the extension to the pumpkin patch. So I put it up here to try and suppress some of those weeds. Now, I do still have weeds in the end of that raised bed there, but before I move that trellis, I'm just going to take everything out of there and just kind of wholesale dig and sweep everything out so that I can start over with it. I pulled this butternut plant out of the tomatoes and put it over the trellis, but I don't think it's going to do anything. It's been growing and it's been blooming for a while, but as I said, I've come to realize that squash just don't like it back here, maybe with the exception of this crazy pumpkin. But yeah, so I'm going to have to plan accordingly for next year. And I'll move this trellis too, because it's not that well done, honestly. I just kind of threw it up in a hurry, and I need to stretch that out a little tighter and make it a little sturdier, and then I will figure out where I'm going to put it. I may put it on the other side between the landscape fabric so that I can have things like this, or the small wonders. The squash are not that heavy, so I think it'll do okay on a trellis like this, but I'll have to take that into consideration when I do my garden plan. Now, I'm going to measure how long this is and get an estimate so that I can figure out where it'll fit best and what I can plant on it. I didn't quite stretch the fabric out as much as it should have been stretched, but that's because it would run over my parsley, and my parsley is still going strong, so I'm going to leave it for a while. I'm really surprised it hasn't bolted by now, but it's good because it's still usable. Just look at her. She's ridiculous. So I still have a lot to do before the fall garden, but I'm happy with the progress I've made. I like my new project with my barrel planters all in a row, and that should make things a little tidier and easier to work with. I've kind of lost track of what week it is, so I'm going to have to actually go look at the calendar and count. But I think I'm not alone in that, maybe. Anyway, that's what's going on around here, and I hope everyone is doing well. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you to all the new subscribers. We're getting close to 100 now. That's great. And happy gardening. I'll see you on the next one. The tiny leopard stalks the okra. Hey, that's not a litter box, you know.